if Coinbase wins, for example, if the judge were to say that the tokens themselves are not securities and that Coinbase as an intermediary, they're not an issuer, it really would put Coinbase in a massive regulatory advantage.
All right, let's get right into the interview. We have famous crypto lawyer John Deaton joining us today. John Deaton, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you doing, Mo?
I'm doing fantastic. John, I just want to give people a little bit of exposition here. For those who haven't really followed closely exactly what's happening with the SEC versus Coinbase, and maybe they don't have a law degree, can you explain just what is this lawsuit about and why is it so important?
Well, they need to put into context the following. In 2021, Coinbase asked to go public, and the SEC had to make a determination. Coinbase said, not only do we want to go public and become a publicly traded company and be the largest exchange in the United States, we want to do it faster. We want the SEC to place it on what's called acceleration. And in order to do that, the SEC must sit back and think, is this in the public's best interest to allow this acceleration? And guess what? The SEC said, yes, we think that it is in the public's best interest to grant an accelerated IPO to Coinbase. Then you fast forward 2 years later, and the SEC files a case against Coinbase and says the entire business model is illegal. So that's the context that everyone has to understand. Why would the SEC grant a registration, accelerate it, bless it, and then 2 years later turn around and say, oh no, all the assets that you're trading that we knew you were going to be trading, they're all illegal, unregistered securities. And so it's a huge significance. If Coinbase is successful, then it's game over for the SEC.
Yeah, so, what does this mean for the overall altcoins that the SEC has been targeting? I mean, they've kind of pivoted their decisions on what's happening in this market nonstop, back and forth. Almost every single week, they have a new idea or thought on the entire market. So when you're looking at the altcoins that they've now said pretty much everything other than Bitcoin is not or is a security, how do they approach this with the lawsuit? What does this mean for altcoins if the SEC somehow does win this case against them?
Well, it would be absolute devastating news. Now, we need to say, obviously, this is a federal district court case. So there are appeals. If Coinbase wins, the SEC can appeal it. If the SEC wins, then, of course, the Coinbase can appeal it. But the precedent that it would set, if the judge were to say, yes, these tokens, we're talking about Cardano, Solana, we're talking about major cap altcoins. If the SEC is successful and the judge agrees and says, yeah, they're all unregistered securities, then basically everything is an unregistered security. Now, ETH is in a very kind of special place, and I'll tell you why. You're right. Gary Gensler in the SEC has said everything but Bitcoin essentially is a security. But the SEC has already granted ETH futures contracts. So there exists today, just like there used to be Bitcoin futures ETFs, there exist ETH future ETFs. And so BlackRock has already submitted for a spot ETH ETF, and it's going to be delayed, no doubt, because the SEC already delayed it. But most people think the conventional wisdom is that ETH will get a spot ETF eventually because they'll just sue the SEC the way Grayscale did over the spot Bitcoin ETF. But you're right. As of right now, everything except Bitcoin, according to the SEC, is an unregistered security. And it would be devastating. You'd see a complete collapse, I think. I'm not a price guy. You guys know that shit more than I do. Sorry for the language. But it would be devastating.
I would agree. So we have Bitcoin has a little bit of a unique distinction. Ethereum has a little bit of a unique distinction. Are there any other altcoins on your radar that might serve as an outlier, whether it's favorable or unfavorable? Can you see XRP or a Solana, maybe bucking the trend where Bitcoin, Ethereum, and maybe a third or fourth altcoin is, listed as unique?
Well, XRP is already in that unique status because the judge actually wrote XRP in and of itself is not a security. So if you also note that the Coinbase case did not list XRP as one of those tokens that they were claiming as an unregistered security, even though they had already done that in Ripple. So as of right now, guys, XRP is the only token that has judicial clarity as far as the token itself. Bitcoin, obviously, with the spot ETF, that's a foregone conclusion. That's always going to be an outlier and have its own distinction, special place. XRP has this judicial clarity, if you will. It hasn't really translated in price, but it certainly is in a unique position compared to the others. Cost Ripple $200 million, and of course XRP holders and our 76,000 people that joined had a big part of that success.
Yeah, that was definitely a huge breakthrough too. And I kind of have a thought on I want to get your thoughts on the outcome of this. Let's say Coinbase does take the win on this. I know you've put out percentages between 40 to 50% that I've seen. I don't know if those have adjusted, over the last few days. I think that was a pretty recent interview. But if Coinbase does come out on top on this, does this make them essentially stronger than the SEC, because it's not going to prevent them from listing future altcoins? And if they have now this regulatory clarity out of this lawsuit and win against them in, like you said, a federal court, does that mean they're going to be creating this Coinbase effect, essentially, where any project that gets listed on this not only gets that clarity, is now on a publicly traded company, and that can obviously have a pretty significant effect on these altcoins?
Oh, that's an outstanding point. It really is, because if you're a traditional finance guy and you want exposure to crypto, a lot of people are going to say, just go with Coinbase. Obviously, Coinbase is the custodian for a lot of these spot ETFs, so they have that niche. But you're 100% correct. If Coinbase wins, for example, if the judge were to say that the tokens themselves are not securities and that Coinbase as an intermediary, they're not an issuer, there's the blind bid ask transaction, it's just an asset sell, it's not a security sell. If that were to be the outcome of this decision, it really would put Coinbase in a massive regulatory advantage. And you're right, any token thereafter that would sort of get the Coinbase blessing, which already has judicial blessing. And so it would have a cascading kind of bootstrapping effect. And so that's a great point.
I want to ask one more question about XRP. We recently had IPO rumors starting to circulate, but recently they have taken a step back saying, well, we don't want to pursue any kind of IPO at the given time due to the regulatory environment. If we get someone to replace Gensler in the next year or two, do you see those IPO sands starting to shift? And what are your thoughts on a Ripple IPO or Ripple Labs IPO potential?
Yeah, I think Ripple, you're right. Ripple took it off the table as far as 2024. If Gensler were to somehow resign, which I don't foresee, but if for some reason the political pressure became too much, he became a political liability in an election year and he stepped away. And then you got a new chairman who then came in immediately with hey, this is a new sheriff in town and we're going to work with entrepreneurs. We're not going to have such an anti-crypto platform or policy. Then I could see potentially Ripple coming back to the table. But you have to understand, they're still in the fight. Ripple's in the penalty phase of the case, which means the judge has to decide how much do they have to pay. Remember, this isn't a fraud case. This is just, hey, you technically violated this 1936 law, even though we're in 2024, and you have to pay a fine. Whether that fine is 100 million or 10 million, I don't know, but they're actively still arguing. There's no indication of there's going to be a settlement between the SEC and Ripple. So therefore, they still have that uncertainty. What investors are going to be, hey, well, Ripple's going to be fined $1 billion. It's just not an environment that any reasonable CEO would take to the market with an IPO. It's too much of a dark cloud. Once that dark cloud is erased, there's a settlement, Ripple gets fined $10 million, Brad Garlinghouse writes a check, then the next day the IPO is back on the table.
All right, well, speaking of Ripple, I want to put a Ripple through the New York Times bestseller list. Check out BrassKnuckleBooks.com. John has a book out, folks, so make sure you go check that out. But speaking of policy, you said the situation that's happening in Texas at the border between the Texas National Guard and the federal agents is the most important thing happening in the nation at the moment. Well, this morning, we have a trucker convoy heading to the southern border. Do you see a similar situation happening in America that happened in Canada? Do you think it's possible that Biden will freeze bank accounts of these protesting truckers?
I mean, that would be political suicide, in my opinion. Listen, that you're assuming that Biden's calling the shots. I don't make that assumption. If someone were to do that, though, at this point in time, I just would see that as political suicide in an election year. But there's no doubt that the border situation has reached a level that is mind-boggling. I mean, I actually am fearful that we're going to see Texas agents versus, federal agents. What if someone, draws a gun? I mean, are we going to have American versus American, fighting on the southern border? It really is an unfortunate situation. And unfortunately, we don't have the political leadership that we need in this country.
Yeah, well, Raytheon will be right there to sell all the weapons to us. So it's going to be bullish on those stocks for the chat listening in. But no, jokes aside, guys. But, a lot of people don't care about politics. But at the end of the day, politics, they care about all of us in here. So I'm very curious to kind of get your thoughts on just the retail side of this. You led 70,000 XRP, or a huge part of that, in, kind of fighting against the SEC early on in the last bull run for our rights, really just the natural right to be able to trade these assets and stand up against a regulatory body that was just enforcing policies that were quite unconstitutional. So from that perspective, what can a retail audience, the average Joe, do looking up to, or just look for up in anticipation of this new election cycle? Which, I'm not going to say president, but administration is really going to benefit them more? Is it going to be coming down to the votes for them, or is it going to be actually standing up and being a part of a lawsuit that attacks the SEC and Gary Gensler for market manipulation of one of the most atrocious launches of a financial product I've ever seen? What can we do just to help out?
Well, one, listen, I'll make a plug to my crypto law, which I don't have sponsors. I don't make any money, but I have a Connect to Congress tab. You just put in your address, takes 30 seconds, and you can draft a letter it'll go straight to your two senators and your House representative. Right now we have it plugged, asking Patrick McHenry, who's the chairman of the FSC in the Congress, to actually issue the subpoena that he was threatening. And he writes all these letters, and basically our programmed letter basically says, issue the damn subpoena, which were records of SBF and Gary Gensler and other documents that the SEC must overturn. Listen, we have to fight government intrusion whenever it comes. And we have to also avoid a nanny state. People have a right to determine what is in their family's best interest. If they want to own Bitcoin, own Bitcoin. You want to own XRP, own XRP. The SEC should be focused on the Sam Bankman-Frieds or the Alex Machinskys and Celsius or the Do Kwons and the fraud cases. Focus your attention on that, because there is fraud in crypto and there has been. But as far as assets that people want to have exposure to, we have a right to this. America. I mean, you should have the freedom to say, you know what? I can't stand the fact that you're just printing money all day, and I'm going to own Bitcoin because whether it's a good investment or not, I believe it is a hedge against the debasement of the U.S. dollar. Regular people should have that access. And what I would encourage people to do is fight the accredited investor rule, which to me is the most abhorrent rule ever in financial markets. You could be a Marine or in this, a soldier in the Army. You could serve your country. You could lose a limb. You could lose your life, but you can't have pre-IPO shares of any company because you don't have $1 million excluding your home, or you don't make $250,000 a year for 3 years in a row. And so I just think that it is time as citizens that we speak up, and it can make a difference. There's some people out there that say, hey, you can never make a difference. The 75,000 XRP holders, we submitted affidavits. The judge cited those affidavits in her decision. And so Naomi Brockwell allowed me to go in to speak in the library case for her and other LBC holders. The judge cited that hearing. So your participation can make a difference. In this election, I'm not going to get political, but freedom is on the line. And so I'd ask you to consider that when you're making your election choice.
Yeah, Brockwell, fantastic resource when it comes to freedom. And you say you don't want to make it political. Well, I'm going to drag you back into the arena because you brought up FTX. You brought up Sam Bankman-Fried or Scam Bankman-Fried, everyone's accounts there. If we get a new administration, do you think there would be any follow-up, any kind of investigation in some of the political donations? Or are both sides dirty and both sides want to sweep it under the rug?
The latter. Both sides, in my opinion, have been dirty. We live in the corruption era, guys. And if you go back in time, you'd have to go back to the late 1800s to what was called the Gilded Age, when there were like open bribes and kickbacks going on in Congress. And that's how bad it is. I mean, think about the chairman of the FDA is the chairman of the FDA on Friday. On Monday, he's a board member of Pfizer. You've got Hinman goes to A16Z and they help him write the speech. And now he's a partner with the guys that helped him write the speech, while he was making millions and millions from his law firm while he was at the SEC. Jay Clayton dropped an investigation against Apollo Group after Jared Kushner got a huge $100 million deal. And then Jay Clayton is named a board member of Apollo Group as soon as he leaves the SEC. And so whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, they're all corrupt. They all need to go. Term limits need to be instituted, in my opinion, and we need to start having statutory bars. If you work at the FDA, you can't go work for the pharmaceutical companies that you were just regulating. If you work at the SEC, you can't just go to Wall Street and work for the company that you were just regulating. And so we have to institute that kind of ethics back in our government.
Yeah, it's a blackmailocracy for sure.
We have, you can start anywhere, whether it's Jamie Dimon or Larry Fink from BlackRock for saying years is money laundering index. Our politicians are the world's greatest traders and call it a free market, even though they have inside access and knowledge to their committees. The amount of corruption is at an all-time at this point. So I have to straight up ask you, just moving into this election cycle, then, and we're going to pull you in the ringer here. What is a better administration moving forward for crypto then? Is it going to be, I'm not going to make this a left or right issue. It's just, which administration are we focusing on and how do we anticipate the outlook for the crypto in the United States?
Well, I think when the incumbent administration isn't working, you get rid of them. And so that's my position. I've been a registered Democrat, a registered Republican, and a registered independent during my life. But the bottom line is right now you have Elizabeth Warren has a bill that I call it the bankers ban on Bitcoin bill, right? She calls it the anti-money laundering bill. Effectively, it is a ban on self-custody in the United States. It's a ban on Bitcoin, a ban on crypto, and 20% of the U.S. Senate is on board with this bill. It was written by the bankers. Jamie Dimon is the chairman of the Banking Institute, and they were the ones that wrote the bill. And we know that. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. Because Senator Marshall stood up at a luncheon or something and said, yeah, Senator Warren and I, the first thing we did was go to the bankers and say, can you write this bill? And so when you have the administration literally saying we want to end crypto in the United States, I think the choice is being made. Now, there are other issues, but if you are someone who says, I have the right to own an asset that I deem good for me and my family and my life, you shouldn't be prevented from it. And so that's my position on who should be the next, who should win the election.
I couldn't agree more, John. I think the perfect way to kind of wrap this up then would just be, what is your 5-year outlook on this industry? How can we vote for you when you run for Congress and take on these people? But yeah, what are you just anticipating in the markets this year then, and just wrapping up into the next 2 to 3 years? What does that look like in your terms of crypto adoption in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think that the election is very, I'm ultimately a bull because you can't ban crypto. You guys know that. I know that. You can make it very much difficult. But I will tell you that, if the election were to go a certain way, then you could see Senator Warren's bill being basically approved on some level, you could actually face some kind of issue. It would be in the courts and it would go up to the Supreme Court. And I think the Supreme Court would ultimately win, but it could be a rough 4 or 5 years in the United States. And so a lot is on stake. Ultimately, though, I'm an optimist at heart, and I believe that we'll be successful. I believed strongly the judge would side for XRP holders, and she did. And so I have faith in our judicial system. It's imperfect, but I have faith in it. So I think that 5 years from now, people are going to. Does that mean 20,000 tokens, guys, are going to be successful? No. But I think that the major platforms, if it does solve a problem, I think there's going to be the utility era. And when the utility era takes effect as opposed to the speculation era, then I think there's going to be reason to be positive in the market.
Yeah, and 5 years should be 2 bull run tops from now, going off the 4-year cycle. So hopefully 5 years from now, we're all feeling pretty good. But John, we're feeling great that you joined us. It was a pleasure talking to you. We bring up your statements, your articles. You're always quoted in all these crypto publications. It was just great putting a face to the name here, John.
I appreciate it, guys. Have a good one. Everybody stay safe out there.
And we will vote for you. You let us know when. I'm supporting you.